Hello everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of boards, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. With this video, we'll be ranking all 13 adventures via Roll20 from the 5e adventure anthology Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel, published by Wizards of the Coast for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you would like to support the channel, please check out patreon.com/roguewatson. Patrons get exclusive access to private videos, custom 5e content, and participate in monthly DM roundtables and private patron D&D games DM'd by me. Hopefully you have already watched or read through my Roll20 review of Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel, where I give my overall thoughts on the entire book and basically tell you if it's worth getting on Roll20 and worth flipping through and looking at. But as I promised in that video, I'll be doing a ranking video, which is similar to what I did with Candlekeep Mysteries, which of course that book is also very similar to Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel, an anthology of multiple kind of bite-sized, although some of them are pretty big bites, of adventures designed for D&D 5e and going from level 1 all the way up to, in this case, level 13. So in this video, I'll be ranking all 13 of those adventures from my least favorite to my most favorite. Probably should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. There will be lots of spoilers, obviously. I'm going to be doing a pretty deep dive into these adventures, whereas I didn't go hardly into depth at all with my Roll20 review, so this is for DMs only. If you are at all going to be a player in one of these adventures, please do not be looking through this until after you have completed that. Also, if this is your first time to the channel, do note that I record all of these in one take. It's kind of a stream of consciousness. That's just my style. And expect lots of and us as I try to get through all of these adventures with which I have read the entirety of this book and become super familiar with, but now I have to kind of recite all the information that I have written down. But I do know which ones I really like and which ones not so much. And hopefully, based on what you know of my preferences and styles and how I feel about the adventures that are in here, you can then make your own decisions on where you think these would fit in your rankings, as well as, again, if you think Journeys to the Radiant Citadel is a good fit for you. So, and by the way, obviously I'm using Roll20 to actually give you some visual aids while I go through everything. So we're going to start at the bottom. I will say, overall, as I mentioned in Candlekeep Mysteries, I think the adventures are very solid. I think they're a great collection of adventures. I really like the theme of exploring a lot of more exotic areas and regions that are completely created by their creators and take place in their own little zones, although you can also place them in established fantasy worlds like the Forgotten Realms and Eberron and so on. I would also, I think, go as far as to say that I think I like my favorites here more than my favorites from Candlekeep Mysteries. I don't know if the overall quality is higher. I'm tempted to say that. And it's also hard to compare because Candlekeep does have more adventures, 17 versus the 13 here. But looking at my favorites from this grouping and then going back to Candlekeep Mysteries, these ones kind of excite me a little bit more in terms of would I want to even run them versus Candlekeep. But that also might be just the cult of the new bias in terms of this is the new hotness. So of course, I'm more excited about these. But that's my initial thoughts, is that I think the top ones I'm really, really excited about, possibly, and I think more so than the ones from Candlekeep. But do check out that ranking video if you want more mini adventure anthology ranking goodness. All right, so we are going to start at the bottom at number 13, which means I think it's my weakest adventure, and then build our way up from there. I'm going to try to do this in less than an hour, so please stay with me. All right, so at number 13, my least favorite adventure is Wages of Vice. This one is for level 5, and it is a urban mystery murder investigation story, which doesn't necessarily mean it's bad out of the gate or anything, but this is probably a style of adventure that I'm not, I don't find particularly compelling. And when I'm looking at adventures, a lot of times I like a pretty good balance. I like a balance between role-playing, exploration, and combat. If you can throw a little bit of a dungeon crawl in there, that makes me very happy. And yes, none of these unfortunate content has color. Don't blame me. But I've already I've mentioned that in my Roll20 review. And this particular adventure is really heavy on the urban exploration. You're only in this one city, which is usually a problem with the lower level adventures, but I feel like this one particularly, I didn't get a good sense for the region because the whole region is just kind of this one city. But essentially there's some faction dispute, and a person is controlling other people via this drug, basically, and using them to kind of murder other people. Which, funny enough, there's actually one or other two adventures that also use the possessed people angle. And it just feels like you're on a series of linear paths as you go from investigation to investigation, and all these people are going crazy and are trying to stop them. So there's no real monsters or anything. It's just kind of people going nuts. There's a pretty funny scene right here of these like dancers going crazy. And I think the final resolution isn't that interesting. And then the one map that includes here, the parade route map, like obviously needs a lot of work on Roll20 to make that work. And it's just kind of one secret. I mean, it kind of reminds me of the end of The Princess and the Frog, I guess, but with the actual climax happening as the kind of Mardi Gras style parade goes through. But I couldn't wrap my head around a good, compelling way of running this adventure. There's interesting moments, but the plot is just kind of ho-hum, and the whole thing is just over really, really short. So it's just, unfortunately, makes the Cardinal Sin of being just very forgettable and not interesting. I think it doesn't have to be a traditional D&D, but that's kind of what I'm looking for in terms of that balance, and I don't feel like that balance is here. It's just a lot of talking to people, and then people get upset and attack other people, and you kind of have to quell it, and then you go from like scene to scene from that. So for me, Wages of Vice is the weakest adventure of the bunch. Coming up next at number 12, we have Salted Legacy, which has some of the best art, which is the cover art. This is the level 1 adventure. And this one is, level 1 adventures are hard. I get it. I will say that the Candlekeep Mysteries level 1 adventure is quite good. It does a great job at making a good example of level 1 adventure. This one, it kind of reminds me of the opening of Wild Beyond the Witchlight with the carnival thing, where it's just kind of a lighthearted, fun thing for your players to do, and there's not much necessarily story here or adventure, which I get at level 1. Again, what do you expect them to do necessarily? And there is a level up to 2, by the way, because we all know level 1 sucks, and you can't have them at level 1 be too long. But essentially, it's this kind of fantasy, urban bazaar thing, which is a neat little location. Again, I absolutely love this art, which again they used for the cover art, which is amazing. And the players are tasked with helping these two kind of rival, bitter families. There's a lot of faction rivalry, by the way. If there's really an underlying theme in Journeys to the Radiant Citadel, it's two groups of people fucking hating each other, or multiples. And in this case, they're two kind of warring like merchant families, and they're both being harassed. They think they're being harassed by each other, but in fact, it's a third party that's trying to turn them against each other. And the third party is using these creatures called the Windlings. And a lot of these adventures use like a unique creature to kind of show off. And it doesn't really get much more interesting than that plot-wise, but there's a lot of fun stuff for the players to do. It's kind of fun. There's these battle prawns and there's maps for all this stuff to do it. So it's a fun little adventure. It's not necessarily my jam. I wish they would have done a little bit more interesting with the plot, maybe. And honestly, it's not a bad thing. It's just the fact that all these adventures are pretty good. It's just going to have to be near the bottom, and I get that level 1 is going to be pretty tricky. So that's Salted Legacy. It's fine. It's just not necessarily my cup of tea when it comes to an interesting, compelling D&D adventure. All right, let's go to number 11, which we have to go down to Sins of Our Elders, which is level 6. I believe this is the Korean-inspired one. This one, I think, really dropped the ball because I wanted it to be horror-themed. I really wanted it to be horror-themed because it starts out kind of horrific. Let's see, what's the map for this one? It's another city one. Yeah, let's see. Nido. So there's so many maps I got to work my way through. There it is. All right. So this one has a forgotten leader, which is manifested as a certain kind of ghostly creature called a Gwishin, I believe. And it's haunting the entire city. This fog rolls in and creatures attack and bad things happen. And then it rolls back out and it like mind blanks everybody, so nobody quite remembers what's going on. And the idea being the spirit is very, very pissed because nobody remembers her. So from a story standpoint, it's actually pretty interesting because the entire story is the play, and the one person that does is like the leader of the city, and because he's got a ring of mind shielding or something, like a specific magic item that protects him. And he hires the players to try and help them out here, and the players have to basically do some investigative work. It is interesting from a story standpoint because they learn about this person who has been kind of wronged in the past and forgotten about, and they go around and talk to all these different people, and they try to gather all these different, artifacts and information. That part's pretty cool. I just wish the danger level was a little more interesting. And in fact, it's a level 6 mission, and one of the notes I wrote down is the fact that it doesn't at all feel like it is made for 6th level PCs. Basically, you have one common encounter with a bunch of tigers, which are, supposed to be spirits, but they just use the tiger stat block. And another that involves like gargoyles, which again are like level CR2. Like that's like the end fight is like a pair of gargoyles. Like it's super, super easy for level 6. And there's just not a whole lot of threat level there. And I guess it's supposed to be more of a storytelling adventure, which I did like the story, but I wanted more out of this one. I wanted more danger and a little bit more adventure instead of just necessarily going around talking to people the whole time, which is kind of what this one ends up being here. Let's see, this Parks of the Elders is the actual climactic encounter. Yeah, you can see there's a pair of gargoyles there. Like we're level 6, man. Those are not gonna last too long. Maybe if you don't have magic weapons, but still. But instead, you basically just end up talking to this ghost and kind of proving, which, I'm fine with that. I think that's a cool way of solving an issue, is trying to, it's somebody who's been wronged and they want you to remember them, which is actually also similar to another adventure, which I believe is coming up next. This is a good segue for me, which is also a figure who has been forgotten and wants people to remember, but she does it much more violently. Number 10 is in the Mists of Manivarsha, which is the level, where is this one? Level 9 adventure, so we're a lot higher now. This one uses the map a lot more effectively than most adventures. You actually go across and journey across this cool Riverlands quite a bit, which is really nifty, and has some really cool art as you get to go on a kind of a canoe ride with your guide, who's a were-tiger. Shout out to Azaka from Tomb of Annihilation. I'm not saying this was a ripoff of that, but I was like, okay, I've kind of seen that exact thing happen. It has a cool inciting incident where let's see if that's the map for it. They're like celebrating this person's huge win and triumph as a crown champion, and then this huge like flood comes in and attacks everybody, and like literally it's like the waters itself kidnap her. And it turns out in this region, these rivers are all run by these river spirits, and it's all very interesting. My main issue with this one is that it relies almost entirely on random encounters. And the random encounters are cool for the most part. I really like this one about a spirit naga appears and asks where the characters are heading. It offers to give a single character a pearl of power if the character is brave enough to let it bite it 3 times. That's a cool idea for an encounter. I might steal that one. I hope your con save is pretty good, because spirit naga bites are no joke. But unfortunately, that's the entire adventure, basically. After that inciting incident, you get on the canoe with the dude, and you go across and have just a series of random encounters across this overland map, and then you finally reach the finale, and it kind of makes the cardinal sin of not really learning anything about what's going on until the very, very end, and kind of dumps everything out on top of you. And then I think the final boss is a little bit... it's a Yugoloth in the form of this wronged... figure from the past, and I don't know, it was disappointing to me compared to the way it started. I don't think it ended very strongly, even though the whole final map is kind of the boss arena, but it's a Yugoloth with like weaker attacks even too. So it's I think it's a cool region, and I think the encounters themselves are interesting, but it unfortunately does rely almost entirely on random encounters, which to me is a little disappointing. But again, we're getting to where we're a little bit better now, because we're up to number 9, which, by the way, at the end of all this, I will show you my tier ranking so you can see where I categorize everything. They're going to be shown in S, A, B, and C tiers. Coming up next, we have Shadow of the Sun. I really wanted to rank this one higher. It's kind of a testament more to the ones above it than it is below, of why it ended up being relatively middle of the pack. This one had one of the most interesting ideas in terms of its setting and location. This is, I believe it's a way higher level one. Yeah, level 11 for this unique kind of sun-soaked city that is ruled by a celestial. And that is a very, very cool idea. It's something I've never seen before. and the fact that the city is kind of a utopian center of, flourishing arts and culture, and yet a lot of people chafe at the very rigid lawful rule of a bunch of celestials. And I think that's just a fascinating idea for a adventure. It has a fucking cool as hell inciting incident with a purple worm just jutting itself, like a bunch of protesters basically are like yelling, and the yelling attracts a purple worm that comes up out of the ground, and so the players, of course, just happen to be there, and they get to try and defeat the purple worm because it's level 11, baby. Like you can do that to players, which I like. So really cool opening incident. My biggest criticism is it feels like the majority of the mission is kind of a side quest, because you basically go on a mission to go take out this other faction, although it does have a magic carpet chase scene, which is awesome. I'm realizing I might have ranked this one too low the more I talk about it. And an Ifrit who's trying to get his like brother back, and that's what you're chasing after in the magic carpet ride. It's fun, and then only after all that has happened do you actually kind of get to the main quest, if it could be that, and then you realize that you're in. There's two factions you can work for: either the status quo, the whatever the celestial loyalists are, or these non-violent revolutionaries called like I don't forget what they are, the Lion something. And then it's interesting that you can actually choose, and whichever faction you choose is how the final act plays out, which is a prison break aboard this like floating crystal prison thing, which is also really nifty. I think that's you're rescuing like the leader, and it's a cool choice, but that kind of ends up being the entire main quest. So everything that happens before it is almost like a side quest to just go and, hey, can you stop this other faction that is a violent faction, whereas we are not. However, we're being cracked down on and kind of blamed for a lot of this, so help us rescue our person. Or the other person is like, hey, can you, help us guard this person, basically. And then it ends up being a fight that you can kind of change depending on which one the player chooses, which I do respect the hell out of that. That's a very tricky thing to write, is how do I write like a compelling story-driven adventure, but also give the entire party meaningful choice. And I think that's a pretty good way of doing it. I guess I just wished this entire Ashen Air faction mattered more in the overall plot. It feels like maybe it's a little too much for a single mini adventure. Maybe doesn't quite work its story together as well as I would have liked, but I still think it's a very cool idea for a story, and we're starting to get to the better ones essentially now. But it is also fun to look at these higher level adventures and see what you can do, and I really respect, because Wizards doesn't bring the tier 3 and tier 4 content very much. So thankfully, a lot of these ones from Candlekeep and now Journeys to the Radiant Citadel, the higher level ones, do, I think, give a satisfying look at what you can do with higher level D&D play that's not just, end game campaign stuff. All right, coming up on number 8, we have the Trail of Destruction. This one is kind of a apocalyptic scenario. I think it's supposed to be like Aztec, which is really interesting. Very mountainy, very jungly, and has a like elder elemental god who looks like a giant axolotl on fire, which is awesome. Has risen up out of a volcano and is very sad that his fellow fire axolotl, what is he called? Telexolotl. And is very sad that there's not any more of those. So we start shaking and rumbling and basically causing all kinds of havoc and essentially waging war on the surface world, sending a bunch of like fire, what are they called? Salamanders and fire snakes. And it's a straight up like war, like just it's a combination of like this invasion with like an environmental apocalypse. And it works very, very well, considering we're still in like a mini adventure territory. But I feel like it covers a lot of really fun ground. It starts off in the city with you, defending off an attack, which is this one, of the fire snakes and the salamanders. Then you get to travel across the world a bit. I believe it starts down here in Etzelon, and then you travel up and go to the Twin Gods Observatory, which you learn some information, but then the entire thing falls over and collapses, which is an awesome way of doing, your exploration environmental thing as you try to rescue people and survive. Then you get to go meet a fire giant who's really pissed off that, there's this new group of fire creatures that are kind of moving in on his shit. And finally, you get to go down into a pretty cool little mini dungeon crawl, which you know how much I love my dungeon crawls, and end up fighting this giant elder god, not elder god, but you know what I mean, cool like giant fire axolotl creature, which I thought was Awesome. So I think this one checks a lot of the boxes of adventures that I like, and I think the scene of just this region happens to be under the throes of a horrifying environmental apocalypse is also extremely compelling in of itself. So I think it works very, very well. So very much thumbs up to Trail of Destruction. Moving up to 7, Tween Tangled Roots, which is I think it's a higher level one, level 10. This one, for whatever reason, didn't seem that interesting at first, but then I guess it's kind of slow. But once it gets going, I really enjoyed the last act, which is basically once you get to the actual adventuring part of it. Where the hell is it? There it is. It has, it's a corrupted spirit dragon, and you're trying to figure out what's wrong with it. But what I liked is you end up going across these really cool, like, floating sky bridges, which is just an awesome visual. And then there's these, like, floating islands that you can explore. And this whole area is kind of a dungeon crawl, basically, but an outdoors one. But I think it does a better job of Mists of Manivarsha in telling its story and giving you some more things to do, mainly because it does the very clever thing of introducing a rival, not necessarily an entire, like, PC adventuring party like we have in the Critical Role Netherdeep one, but it's still like a group of NPCs who are hunting the dragon, and you are ostensibly also hunting the dragon, but maybe you're trying to figure out more about, well, maybe the dragon's being corrupted by something else. We need to do some investigation work, and I think it works really, really well to have that group as a rival party that you can deal with, and there's all kinds of ways you can deal with them, and they could show up at the end. They could show up to be your friends. They could show up to be your antagonists. They could show up and not even, maybe you didn't interact with them before because you kept shooing them off, and then they're at the, it's a cool thing for the DM to keep, in their back pocket for running this adventure. And I think it unveils pretty well in terms of this whole area is really creepy and has a lot of, good encounters, but it's less about, to me, it's less in random encounter than the Mists of Manivarsha was, and more about these scripted events that keep happening that I think work much better and tell a more interesting story about the world. And then I love the actual boss fight is very, very cool. So you don't really get a full dungeon crawl here, but you do get this, and I mean, plus you get to show off the cool freaking creature here, which is this awesome dragon. But it is currently being corrupted by the tree roots. These, you can even see on the map, it says Spirit Blister. And your goal is to basically kill those rather than the dragon, which I think is always cool when you have a fight that involves not just attacking the thing. And you can see on the GM layer, there's the rival adventuring party right there, which could definitely throw in some interesting complications into the mix. So I think it does a great job of telling its story, also having cool monsters to fight, having a neat region with the creepy, arc of the floating island thing you have to get to from the sky bridge. And then I think it ends really, really strongly with the kind of dragon being corrupted that you can actually save at the end. Tween Tangled Roots. All right, we've got number 6, the Nightsea's Succor, which is level 12. This is one of the high ones. Maybe it's part of the problem with the content, but I think it's easier to get more excited about the higher level stuff than the lower level stuff. Although one of the lower level ones is there's certainly some of my favorites on there as well. But the higher level stuff just lends itself to being able to do cooler stuff. So that's kind of part of the bias I think that I know I have when it comes to adventures, is I can get more excited about the more interesting, fun stuff that players get to do. So in this case, which one am I looking at? This one, Janai. This one never mentions the word slavery, but is very meant to be in that vein, where it's a coastal city that has been raided, people have been kidnapped, a lot of the kidnapped people jumped off the boats, but in this case they had a lot of magic, so they were able to go and form this whole underwater sister city down beneath the waves, and now the people on the surface have all forgotten their magic ways, pun intended, I guess, and now they're trying to rekindle that and trying to search for these magic MacGuffin books, basically, that can try and reignite their own magic. And this one, I just love the fact that it involves, I'm kind of a sucker for underwater stuff, and I think it does a really cool job of that. You get to travel. First of all, there's multiple factions in this one also, although they're a lot less antagonistic than the ones in Shadow of the Sun. But I love that you get to travel down to the underwater city. You get to battle a ghost ship, at one point. I believe you get to battle the ghosts in town, and then you battle them again whenever you get down to the Nightsea. That's the ship I think you take. And then you get to do a little bit of a dungeon crawl when you get down there, which is first you do all that, then you get to go to the underwater city, which is also a really cool thing. This one almost bites off more than it can chew because you don't really even get to see much of the underwater city. You just kind of talk to and then realize there's another two factions down there that both are wanting their hands on the MacGuffins that the players can get. But then you get to go on a little bit of a mini dungeon crawl, which is the trench. And you get to fight more of the ghost people. The ghosts, here's the actual crash ship. Undead versions of the ghost, and there's good ghosts and bad ghosts because they're like the ones that were the spirits of the ancestors who jumped off versus the ones who were like the evil, kidnappers. And then of course you realize it's an aboleth kind of behind these problems that recently moved in and kind of tampered with everything. And I think it's more than fun to throw. Aboleths are just such cool, fun monsters. Very cool to be able to throw them in there. And then at the very end, I love that you've got literally like 4 different factions that you can turn the actual MacGuffin quests into for your final epilogue. I admit I'm just a sucker for higher level content and for cool underwater stuff though also. And this is surprisingly the only one that really explores underwater things. So I really like that. I think it's done very, very well. And there's a lot of just fun. It is a great combination of battling things, mystery and investigation, and also a lot of fun socializing and just exotic stuff. Like just going down to the underwater city is very, very cool. That is the Nightsea Succor. Then we are going up to, okay, we're officially in the top 5 here. And we're going to go through one of the lowest level ones, which is Written in Blood. You want horror. This one does horror. This one is like Southern Gothic horror. I mentioned in my Roll20 review, this reminded me of like a Jordan Peele adventure with Get Out or something. And it is creepy as hell. It has an insanely creepy final boss monster, which is this like undead creature made of limbs. It's got this, classic kind of horror backstory. You learn about these past horrific events that happened, and then you're kind of slowly investigating and piecing things together. It's one that also has people being possessed and attacking other people, and then that leads to your investigation to these kind of rural farmhouses where there's like creepy X's, and you go through, and that's one of the dungeons, like this empty farmhouse. You go into this room, there's a bunch of these possessed people just staring at each other around a table. Like, it's so well done in the creepy factor. And I think we're level, what is this one? Level 3. Which is a good level for doing that because you can still freak your players out. They're low enough level. There's a scene where there's a bunch of like crawling hands, like the crawling claw stat block, like hidden under the table here where you can look under to see them all there. Like, it's so well done. And then you go down and it's basically a rescue mission where you're trying to rescue this one woman who of course has ties to this monster and how it was created. And it just does a really cool job of its storytelling. And there's very few actual horror-based adventures here. A lot of them are more action adventure or mystery investigation. This one is the biggest horror mission, and it is one of my favorites because it is so, so well done. That is Written in Blood. Number 4 is Gold for Fools and Princes. This one, I don't know, maybe Spain is the inspiration here, but I think I like this one. This is level 7, by the way, because a lot of these missions throw NPCs at you. You can tell the designers are very excited to throw their well-crafted NPCs at the player to the point where it almost gets humorous. Like every single adventure is like, and then at one point it's like this one adventure is like, and then you go this way and this person joins you, and then you go a few steps more and this person joins you, and just maybe it's a little too much of that with all these adventures. They get really excited about different NPCs joining the party. Even if and Written in Blood kind of does that too. It's like this one person randomly joins you, and then of course you can't quite go in the farmhouse because her wagon gets stuck or something. I don't mind any of that because that's totally. I would rather you give me more characters than too few because then as a DM I can choose what I want to do with them. This one particularly uses its PC NPCs very, very well because it gives you these 2 princes who have both been called to deal with a recent invasion of monsters in this gold mine. But the thing that the players don't know and nobody knows is that one of the princes is actually behind everything. It's his job. Basically, another one controls the mine, and this other one shows up to be like, man, you've been incompetent. Look what's happening. Let me go in and rescue the people. And it's totally like a political ploy. And he's been behind. He hired another person to basically summon creatures using this magic that lets you summon creatures for far longer than they normally would be summoned for. because apparently this mine has been invaded by a creature that everybody thought was long dead extinct, which it is. These are all magically summoned creatures, which functionally means they're the exact same, except they poof out when you kill them. But I love that idea because then you've got both princes with you, and you can really play it up as the DM. One of them is all very heroic and rah, but the players can, be rolling insights, while the other one is kind of reserved and not really sure about what's going on. And a little bit more, he's not like an asshole or anything, but he's a little more of the easy life. You can tell he doesn't really go into a lot of dungeons and that kind of thing. And there they are on the map right here. So I really like that angle. I can see where that makes for a very fun, compelling adventure, and it allows you to do the environmental storytelling just through those two NPCs, and also has a pretty solid dungeon crawl here with good map art and everything. I do wish there was color, of course, as always, but I think it's a pretty nice little dungeon crawl, and you fight a bunch of these Aurum-Varaxes is the creature, which, and I'm also partial to all the new creatures that this one adds. You average about one new creature per adventure, and that's kind of the signature one that you show off, and some of them are cooler than others, but this one's perfectly cool. So I think this adventure works really well. It doesn't necessarily have the big bombastic memorable moments, and there's even a part where you're, instead of going, before you go into the dungeon, you actually go back to the city to do some research on everything, so you learn more information about maybe these creatures have been summoned and maybe somebody's behind it, and then you go on the dungeon crawl. But I just think it all works very well and checks a lot of the boxes that I'm looking for an adventure, and I am very much a sucker for a good dungeon crawl, which this one has one. Number 3 on my list is probably the most batshit insane adventure. One of the most crazy adventures I think I have reviewed from any of these, including this one plus Candlekeep Mysteries. And that is Orchids of the Invisible Mountain, which starts out fine. It doesn't start out that crazy, but it's very crazy. It's like sugarcane fields, and it's very much like I guess it would be Latin America, kind of like a Cuba type island theme, and it's got like thrycreen in it. Like this whole region borders the Feywild and the Far Realm in very interesting ways, to where people get kind of nightmares and things bleed over, and it's like, that's a very cool thing to, and it just has thrycreen in it, which is, hats off to the developer for doing that, or the designer. Like, that's just amazingly cool. There's this whole backstory of this like elder god that watches over this place, and it seems crazy, and then it just gets kind of crazier from there as you eventually get to make your way. Oh, it has an awesome god, the monsters are really cool. Let's see if I have a picture of these things. They're called like whistlers or something. Oh shoot, maybe I'll have to find a map where they're on. But these really creepy, like they look kind of like, I don't know, creepy alien undead things, and they invade, and then you defeat them, and then like through a portal you see somebody like saying this really awesome, I wonder if I can find it. This is the person that you see through the event. She just says it's a classic, like her words get cut off when it first starts. Here's the whistlers. Oh, look at how creepy that is. That's awesome. Again, level 13, you can do some cool shit. There we go. I can see you, but I can't get through. Listen, please. A ghost Orca Tapu is under siege by alien creatures. Our guardian has fallen in a deathly slumber. If the great spirit dies, all is lost. We are brave souls. Seek the Tipui. Find the portal in the Llanos. Nene knows the way, but be. And then it breaks off. The rift collapses and is gone. That's a great, great, great starting moment. Awesome inciting incident. And Nene is referring to her macaw. So instead of getting the classic NPC that joins the party, which I mentioned all the other ones do, this one it's a fucking bird that joins the party and is smart enough to like point you towards the way, but you don't get to actually, it's not a talker. So I think that would very much ingratiate this party, the bird, into any party. And that bird just leads you on a merry chase through the world a little bit, and then you eventually go to the portal, which leads you to the Feywild, which is a crazy dungeon crawl, which is this one. It's actually this one has 3 battle maps. This is the first half of this dungeon crawl, which involves like cloakers hiding behind a statue, a ship with a displacer beast on it going into this cave, and that cave leads to this dungeon where it's got more of those creepy whistlers. It's got this creepy fetid like poisonous pool. There's a bunch of night hags on this tree right here. The pool is full of not 1 but 2 aboleths. And then the actual spirit you're trying to rescue is a spirit naga. And in order to help free it of its corruption, you then have to go to the Far Realm. So all of this isn't enough, baby. You now have to go to the corpse of this like giant elder insectoid god thing in the Far Realm. And this map is fucking crazy. You appear, the Whistler's like eating people's memories in the form of these eggs. There's a gibbering mouther on the door. There's just open void space with the Beholder hanging out right here in between the two corpses. There's a Demi-Lich here as the final boss. It is bananas crazy cool. Again, I even skipped the part where you have to get the Hammock of Worlds, from a Storm Giant, which is back in the real world before you can teleport to all these different worlds. A magical hammock that teleports you, which is amazing. This one just has it all, and I feel like I'm being seduced by the high-level nature of it, but even then, I gotta give credit where credit is due, and it's very well done. I would be very ecstatic about running this for any Tier 3 party because it's so crazy, the stakes are so cool, and it really shows off what you can do when you've got higher level players and you can let's drop into the Feywild and fight a whole bunch of crazy big monsters, but also have some cool storytelling. I like the fact that you get that initial, NPC telling you that, and then you finally go meet her like halfway through the quest. There's a classic like sugar daddy, sugar boss, whatever he's called at the very beginning of the region, because you still explore that region somewhat too before you end up hopping to the other one. So it's almost, God, it almost feels like 3 adventures in one, and I am heaping a lot of praise on it, and yet it's still not my number 1. There's actually 2 more that I think I love a little bit more, even though I do think this one is absolutely amazing. So at number 2, we're going to go to, which at this point you can start guessing because there's not many left, Buried Dynasty. This is definitely the Chinese-inspired one, which the reason I love this one, it's got a really great dungeon crawl, which I love. Where's this one? This is gotta be another high level one too. Level 13. Oh, sorry, Orchids was level 14. This one is level 13. Which is here. And the whole region takes place in a city, which normally I'm not a fan of. Normally I want to see your whole region map, but this one does such a good job with its, imperial city, and then you get to explore the ruins beneath the city. At the behest of a quest-giving NPC, who, by the way, if you look at her stat block of the Grand Secretary, she is a level 18th level spellcaster, no joke. She sends, basically the Emperor, the Immortal Emperor is dying because they can't find any more of the MacGuffin they need to keep him immortal, so you're sent to go to the ruins to try and recover that. Except that's not what she tells you. She tells you just to go down there to find, interesting stuff, basically, or whatever she tells you. But you're sent there with an NPC whose job is to basically look for the real thing. And you go down, you explore around, and there's some interesting, things to discover. And I love the Mirror of Life tapping, which is also from Tomb, which is great. And there's an ancient person there you can get a lot of information from, a bunch of wraiths in a fight. But you discover, there's an Otyug. There's a great moment where there's an Otyug that pretends to be a bunch of rags or something. I forget what it is, but it's hilarious. I didn't realize they had that much intelligence, but it's straight up, and it can kind of mimic and speak. It's got telepathy or something. I guess I've always missed that from that creature. I thought it was just a feral beast, but it's a really almost comedic scene. It's really well done. A bunch of ropers here for good measure. That's always fun. So a nice little high level dungeon crawl, and then when you get halfway through it, or really once you complete it, then the quest giver NPC says, okay, now that I've gotten the information from you, I'm going to dump you into the place where I dump everybody that I basically betray. And then you're dumped into the dungeon part 2. And this dungeon is batshit crazy because it just has pretty much the one room, but every single round, 2 of these guys animate and appear as stone golems. All the way around the room, every 2 do that. And at some point the players realize, oh shit, we gotta get out of this room because we're gonna fucking die. It really reminds me of an old school, like D&D or video game ass situation that they have to get out of. So very, very cool, very memorable moment for sure when she betrays you and you get dumped in this room and you have to make your way out. Then you get to fight a bunch of mages and free a gold dragon who has currently been chained up because they're trying to get the essence from him that they need. And then at the very end, you end up appearing in an opera house or something, like a stage house, and the emperor's right there, and you pop out and everybody's like, well, what's going on? And then you get to try and explain yourself, and there's a really compelling climax that is not a battle. Instead, you have to basically convince the emperor, hey, she just betrayed us, and here's all the things that happen, here's the evidence we have. And there's a whole thing where if you don't have, the right amount of evidence or anything, then she can counterbag and say, no, I've been your loyal, steward for this long, and these people are, obviously they've manipulated things. And I think it's a really compelling, cool way to do kind of a social climax at the end. And I just love the scene where you pop up in the middle of, where the emperor is and a bunch of crowd of people and everything. So I think this one does a great job. It also, unlike some of the others, which I do feel like kind of go a little too hard into their own thing and maybe last a little bit too long, this one still feels like a mini adventure, but at the appropriate like tier 3 threat level that we're at, which is what I say, level 13 for this one. So it's less about making a long adventure going through multiple areas and just very much punctuated by a pretty short dungeon crawl, but then you've got a really crazy scene to get through, and then at the end, a really compelling social scene. And I think it marries the role playing and the socializing and the narrative moments really well with a dungeon crawl, to where it's kind of the very much up my alley of what I like to do for my personal level of doing D&D. So this one works very, very well for me, and that's why I put it very high at level 2. However, there can only be one number 1, and number 1 for me is Dearest Mexico. Very much the Mexican-inspired Fiend of Hollow Mind. This is the level 4. This has the great art from the, it's not Dias de los Muertos, it's called something else. But clearly, Night of the Remembered. It's very much based on Mexican folklore mythology. In fact, they even have something that's kind of not a chupacabra, but is a chupacabra, except it's like an owl bear chupacabra. And being in Texas, I have a big affinity for Mexico. And this one has a great dungeon crawl. Easily my favorite dungeon crawl of the bunch. And you know I'm very well seduced by that in the Hollow Mine. But the dungeon crawl is not the beginning nor the end of this adventure. It does a cool thing where there's still things that start out where it kind of starts out almost like a werewolf movie in a way, where there's like mysterious, killings, and there's maybe a monster on the loose, and we're trying to figure out who is it or what's going on. There's a hilarious bandit woman who looks like a grandma that I absolutely love. You can help her out and kind of help her people, and you go to this kind of corrupt, business area that's got this old mine that they're working out of, and that's this map here, which is a huge map, by the way. This is, I think they give you a side view of this one also. Yeah, you can see the side view. I love maps that do that for me, because this is a cool, like, there's an elevator shaft that you're not supposed to be able to get into, so instead you follow the tunnel routes. But it has one of the most amazing traps, which is if you try to open the door into this door here, the floor becomes like a pass-through wall floor, so it just doesn't become a floor anymore, and you pass through and drop like 30 feet into a pile of refuse with a bunch of ochre jellies running around. It's literally like the trash chute that the nasty people use to throw corpses into, which is just a great way to start any kind of combat encounter or battle. You can immediately split the party like that. That is fantastic. It's a really fun dungeon crawl. Ends up with a bunch of dinosaur skeletons and undead, and then you learn things throughout this dungeon crawl about this poor person who's been cursed, and it's a tragedy. He's not really evil. It's just happening to him, but people are trying to exploit him. And then eventually that leads to actually another area, which is not a dungeon. It's just kind of a final boss fight, very much almost like a horror movie, where you end up, or maybe like a Terminator or something, where you just end up in a specific, like, interesting area to fight the final boss. In this case, the abandoned metalworks, and you fight what is basically kind of a were-owl bear, which is this map right here. There it is. I've been trying to look for a map, a token art of this dude, but that's what it looks like. So I think this one is fantastic because it has a great story. You get a good feel for the region. It feels like a Western in a lot of ways, which I really love. It does a great job with the whatever the area is, San Citlan culture and area. It has different ways of ending depending on if you actually kill this person or if you manage to save them, or there's different kinds of epilogues. I love the dungeon crawl, but I also like that the dungeon crawl is not necessarily the beginning or the end of the adventure. It's just in the middle of it. So it feels like it's a lot of content without feeling it as too much content, which I do think is very impressive. And despite some of the others that I loved to death, I still think that overall this one works the best for its length and its region and its unique monster and the dungeon. And so I think the Fiend of Hollow Mind has to be my number 1 overall adventure. All right, if you've stuck around this long, that means I can introduce you to my tiers of all the different adventures. You can kind of see where they end up falling. So you can see here they are right here. So what I consider the C tier adventures, Wages of Vice and Salted Legacy. The B tier adventures are Sins of Our Elders, in the Mists of Manivarsha and Shadow of the Sun. When we get to A tier adventures, I consider those to be Trail of Destruction, Between Tangled Roots, The Nightsea's Succor, and Written in Blood, and Gold for Fools and Princes at A. And then S tier, which I think are the best of the best, are my top 3, which is Orchids of the Invisible Mountain, Buried Dynasty, and The Fiend of Hollow Mind. And that is my final ranking for all 13 adventures of Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel. Overall, I think it's just a really great product. I was surprised because going into it, I, probably like a lot of you, were wondering, well, wait, how can I even incorporate some of these adventures into my individual established worlds, or as somebody that, is pretty much only runs things in the Forgotten Realms, how can I use them? And I, again, look at my Roll20 review, and I kind of cover that and how you can do that. But I could easily see myself dropping a lot of these different adventures, that don't even necessarily you don't have to go hard into that region at all. You could just treat it as a cool adventure, use the names and use, some of the background information, but I think you could actually drop them in pretty effectively to a lot of different areas. Some, of course, easier than others, but overall, I was very, very impressed. And as I mentioned, I think I like probably all 3 of my S tier top 3s, possibly even more than any of the ones from Candlekeep Mysteries. All right, I think that will do it for my ranking of Journeys Through the Radiant Citadels. Shout outs to patrons, Platinum patrons, Joe, Will, Thomas, Adam, Stan, William, I'm Loud, Brandon, Genocider, David, Eclectic, Roleplay, Roll, Christopher, Brian, William, and David. And gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Preboy, and Yuma, Marcus, Dead Lizard, Lion, Sam, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Nathan, Fasica, Tortoise, Scott, Humanoid, Size, Sphincters, and Stephanie. Thank you all very much for your support. Appreciate you watching this video review.